Morning, everyone. Welcome to our flagship event on the calendar program. My name is Enox Basara. I'm sure you get some of my emails quite regularly, but great to see you all here on a holiday. It's wonderful to see some of you again. And also great to also mix again after some time. With COVID, we haven't been able to do all of this, so really happy that we can do this again. So thank you to all of you for coming by. And without much time, let me call upon our program manager, Dr. Grace Ramafi, to open the proceedings for us. So please do give her a round of applause as she comes forward.
You know I'm too short. Now, what did I do? Can you all hear me? Okay. All right, good morning, everyone. And let us start by thanking OCHE for making us sit in a comfortable sitting arrangement. I think we were going to be pulling our necks out trying to look at the front. Thanks, OCHE. The topic for today, the Africa we want, couldn't have come at a better time. In South Africa, we just celebrated June month, which commemorates the June 16 events, honoring the contribution of the youth in our country for the struggle for liberation in SA. Today is World Youth Skills Day. Did you guys know? Yeah, today is Youth Skills Day, and it's about the youth making a difference, the youth being involved in the issues that affects our continent or the world at large for that matter. Africa has the world's youngest population with a median age of 19.7 years. They are considered to be a boon for development prospects in any region of the continent. Are you in agreement? Unemployment amongst the youth in Africa has reached an alarming rate. It's an all-time high now. According to the quarterly labor force survey for the first quarter of 2022, South Africa's youth unemployment rate was 63.9% for those aged 15 to 24. And 42.1% for those aged 25 to 34 years, to 34 years, while the current official national rate stands at 34.5%. I'm sure our guest speaker knows more about this than me. Before we introduce him to come to the fore, let me acknowledge, I don't know if Dr. Khadi is already here. If she is not here, she will be joining us sometime during the proceedings. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce our accounting officer who has taken the position that was held by your rainmaker, our colleague, Ms. Sisanda. Mr. Leon Khanushi, can you stand up so that they all see you? Yeah, so you will be seeing this face all the time. And think, I noticed or I realized that he's really money sharp here. So you must think twice before you request for anything. Okay. And so I'm not going to stand here for long because the day is yours. Today is your day. But before we bring our guest speaker to the fore, I'm going to let us hear what our youth say about the Africa they want. Can we watch the video now?
Reimagine Africa. The MasterCard scholars at UP thought about what Africa means to them. They had great insights to give us, and these are some of their inputs. This is about reimagining Africa.
The Africa I envision is one that is borderless.
The Africa that I want
I want a gender-equal Africa.
The kind of Africa that we want is an Africa that is self-reliant.
The Africa that I want is an Africa that prioritizes young people. With young people making majority of the population on the African continent, it only makes sense and it's fair that they are given an opportunity to embrace themselves and become better people.
The Africa I want is unified. The borders are not restrictive, but they are doors to more opportunities.
One that is self-resilient and one that is economically independent.
An Africa where good governance will be consolidated. I also want an Africa where we don't have to wait till 2063 to have sustainable goals actualized.
An Africa that can eradicate poverty through acquisition of skills and affordable education.
I also envision an Africa where there is a promotion of ethical leadership. I myself being a leader, I expect everyone to also be an ethical leader, and this is the only way that we can eradicate poverty and make more opportunities for the young people.
We'll be able to refine our natural resources for the use of humanity within Africa and the rest of the world.
The Africa that I also envision is one that takes care of its environment and also takes care of the people that is indigenous to it.
I want an Africa, an independent Africa, where we don't have to rely on the rest of the world for survival.
Is technology and innovation to eliminate some of the problems that we've had for years, such as hunger.
And I also want an Africa where welfare will be endogenously sourced and not exogenously sourced.
The youth are woke and innovative. They do not rely on the government for help. The elderly leaders do not cling onto their seats until the last minute. They work together with the youth to provide them with wisdom they've had over the years.
The Africa that I envision is one that we can all say, before there were borders, before I was everything, I was African.
Okay, here I am again. And Wish, you are not the only fan. I'm the fan of our speaker. He's actually my mentor. And he was calling me today that he is my bodyguard. Okay. I don't even know where to start. And I'm sure Wish understands what I'm talking about. Even Koketso this morning said to him, how many lives have you lived? You know, that's who he is. Ntate Bonang Mohale, Professor Bonang Francis Mohale, was appointed the Chancellor for the University of the Free State in 2020. He's the Professor of Practice in the Johannesburg Business School of Economics and Chairman of the Bidvest Group Limited. He is highly respected South African businessman, known as much for his patriotism and for his active role in advancing the country's interest. He is the author of the best-selling book, I have the book, Lift as You Rise, launched in November 2018. It is a compilation of some of his spoken and written words in which Prof. Mohale reveals the issues he is passionate about, amongst them, leadership, transformation, people development, constructive collaboration, and integrity. I wear glasses, but I'm still blind, okay? His latest offering is titled, Behold the Turtle. Each one of you, even though I'm upset you came late, will get a copy. Behold the Turtle is his thoughts on ethically principled leadership. And it expands on issues of leadership, resilience, ethics, and social justice, sounding a call for change. The change that our scholars just said they want to see. Prof. Mohale was the Chief Executive Officer of Business Leadership South Africa, commonly known as BLSA, until June 2019. a forum which brings together the leadership of South Africa, South Africa's most influential and successful big businesses and multinational investors to exchange ideas, facilitate effective dialogue with government and other stakeholders, and advocate for pro-business, economically sustainable policies and programs. Prior to joining BLSA, he ended a distinguished term as Vice President of Upstream and Chairman of Shell South Africa Pty Limited at the end of June 2017. Prof. Mohale, who originally studied to be a medical doctor, has had a distinguished career at the helm and leadership roles of several major South African and multinational companies, including Otis Elevators, South African Airways, Sanlam Limited, and Drake and Skull Integrated Facilities Management. He currently serves on the boards of Swiss Re Africa Limited, Rand Merchant Bank Limited, and SBV. He has an impressive track record of building successful companies, delivering results, and making significant advances in transformation in companies he has the privilege to lead. Prof. Mohale has been a vocal, courageous, and active proponent of transformation since the 1980s and has played a leadership role in the Black Management Forum for more than 33 years, where he was president. I can stand here the whole day and continue, but I'm going to stop here. Can you please help me welcome him to the floor?
Sanbonani Absheni. I'm looking at the directors there to say, is it okay if I stand here or here? Is it better here or here? So the value, the utility is in the conversation that we are going to have. It's called a dialogue. When you express some of the things that are deeply held, bone deep beliefs of yours. When you ask some questions and I pretend like I know the answers. I think in English it's called dialogue. Die for two. Not monologue. One. So let me start by thanking you for making time in your busy schedule to come and have this conversation with me. Of all the things that you could have chosen to do, you chose to wake up early in the morning, brave the morning traffic, and just come and have this crucial, critical, but nonetheless courageous conversation. So I'll paint a picture, a potpourri, a spectrum of some of the things that keep us awake at night in trying to come to some mental picture of the Africa we want, the Africa we have all been praying for, the Africa of Rolihlahla, Nelson Mandela's dreams, of Kwame Nkrumah, of Kenneth Kaunda, of Gabriel Robert Mugabe, when he was still a good man. In the 21st century, when so many of us dare to hope that joy and peace will prevail. At the time that we thought, 28 years into democracy, South Africa will be in a better place, upwards and forwards trajectory. But sadly, 28 years later, where we are today, we are worse off than we were when Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela inherited a technically bankrupt country. Went on to create a cabinet of 400 MPs. Out of nothing, created the modern day South African Revenue Services. From the Department of Expenditure, Department of Finance, Department of Excise and Customs, to create one of the top 5 revenue collecting agencies in the world, now led by Edward Kieswetter, that yesterday decided to go on strike because it seems to be a national part-time that we do, instead of being concerned about building a sustainable Africa in the short term, so that we can realize this notion of a resilient Africa, because surely in Africa, resilience is much more than the food, water, energy nexus. At a time that I'm a member of community of chairpersons of the World Economic Forum, I chair the 3 boards of companies. 2 of them are listed entities. The Bidvest Group Limited, ArcelorMittal, and SBV Services, which is the cash in transit people. So at the World Economic Forum, we talk about 3 things that keep us awake at night. Number 1 is this unprovoked, unwarranted, and therefore unjustified invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It will not be a correct characterization just to simply call it a Russo-Ukraine conflict, because the Ukrainians have nothing, no bone to chew with the Russians. In fact, a majority of them are indigenous Russians. The second thing we talk about, the pandemic. This 1-in-100-year event that none of us could have foreseen, therefore all of us were blindsided. But nonetheless has changed everything. Changed the way you learn, changed the way we work, changed the way we mourn our dead, the way we engage, interact, and interface. From now on, we will never go back to what it was before. Therefore, there is no point in hankering for the past or looking with great anticipation to the future without stopping and just smelling the roses. Because what's going to emerge from here is not a new Africa, but a better Africa. The Americans talk about building back better. Can we use this opportunity to create the type of continent that is not only emblematic, not only representative of our biggest aspirations, but the Africa that can just fulfill its potential? Not its greatest potential, just its potential. Because you see, Africa is not a poor continent, just poorly managed. Every single solitary one of the resources that the world needs, we are gifted in this continent, not by that mineral being number 15, but all of them being either number 1 or number 2. And yet when you think of poverty, like the pandemic, the face of poverty today is still primarily black and primarily feminine. Because the economic power patterns have been set for generations to come, unless you and I do something that is interventionist to try and halt the decline and put our shoulders to the wheel and push this boulder uphill so that we live an Africa that is on a composite basis substantially better than the one we inherited. Because you see, we haven't inherited this Africa so much from our forebears as we borrowed it from our children. Therefore, it behooves us to live it in a state that is better than we found it in. That is the definition of progress, how we move forward in space and in time. The third is this notion of climate change. In business, we talk about ESG as an acronym for the environment, for society, and governance. An Africa that is better able to look after her children and its people. Not the Africa today that is fast running out of food, fuel, and funds. An Africa of 1.3 billion people, the same size as India. But India is almost a single country, single set of rules and regulations. In investment terms, much easier to deal with because you only have to deal with one president. Same population. An Africa of 55 countries. 54 of them absolutely sovereign. That speak more than 3,000 languages, with a continental GDP of $2.6 trillion US dollars. When you exclude the informal sector, when you include the informal sector that is measured by the World Economic Forum, 3.2 trillion US dollars. So if you do the math, there is absolutely no reason why any of the 1.3 billion of us should go to bed hungry, because there's more than enough in this continent to feed all of us adequately. And Africa, where we are now, at the southernmost tip, called South Africa, has a coastline of 2,500 kilometers, absolutely pristine at the confluence of two oceans, the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, driven by the warm Benguela current and the cold Agulhas current. God's own country, blue skies, African sunshine. Where we have an abundance of sun. Geographically, this is the best country in the world where we have 326 days of days like this, where the sun shines. This is winter. But look at us. Some of you are wearing flip-flops and short-sleeve shirts, and yet the world authority in solar energy is Germany. That has no more than 90 days of sunshine. So I'm hoping that out of all of us here today will emerge solutions that are meant to propel us forward in space and in time as the greatest nation that our forebears know of, the Maoris that built the pyramids and took civilization to Europe. Before we could spell engineering, build the pyramids with some of the heaviest stones, and some of our cathedrals and monuments are still standing. Our scholars in Mali have written extensively, and some of those manuscripts are still being found. And yet today, for some reason, we look at ourselves in the mirror and we think we are the world's hopeless backwater. And yet we know that we are much more than what we have become. An Africa that is blessed with the 3 greatest rivers in the world. The mighty Zambezi that plummets at the Musiwatunya, that our visitors came in our warm hospitality. We say, let's show you God's own miracle and own creation. They have a look at it and say, we'll name it after our queen. And up until today, we still call it the Victoria Falls. Plummeting at 350,000 square cubic meters of water, enough to generate hydroelectric power that could illuminate the whole of the continent. Will have excess electricity to export to Europe. Some of our seas, the most active, especially around the Cape Agulhas, no more than 20 kilometers from the coastline, where you can harness the force, the impetus of the waves and create wave technology, so that when we talk about renewing our integrated resource plan, that in that energy mix, yes, we can talk about coal-fired power stations, because we still have 100 years worth of coal buried under Mother Earth. But because we care about the climate, that more and more our dependence ought to be on renewable energy, because the sun is free. We can harness the force of the wind like they do in the Netherlands, because we even have towns named after this wind, called the Windy City of Gqeberha, the old Port Elizabeth. And you can put these turbines on the tops of African hills in the middle of the ocean, where we disturb nobody and therefore does not have to impact how people engage, interact, and interface. So why is it that when people talk about the dark continent, they talk about us? We're out of 7.4 billion global population. 1.5 billion of them have absolutely no access to any form of energy whatsoever. And from time to time, they wake up in the morning, they go into the bush, cut a few trees to burn in order to warm the water, so that their kids can get washed and they can enjoy tea like we just did this morning. 638 million of those are found here in the continent of Africa. When you look at the satellite map of the world, at night, the rest of the world looks a little bit illuminated. When you look at Africa, there's a small piece in the southern tip that's a little bit illuminated, but the rest is absolute darkness. That's why we're having this conversation today, so that it's not sufficient that I can go to school alone in my singularity without being absolutely obsessed about the well-being of others. Because in Africa, there is no such thing as an extended family or a nuclear family. There's only family. Because in Africa, there is no such thing as a stepson, a stepfather, only a son and a father. If we did that, maybe, just maybe, we might, out of this cohort of people that came this morning, just 3 days before Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela's birthday, where we'll be celebrating the 67 minutes, which is representative of the time he dedicated to struggle, to ensure that all of us have peace, justice, and equality. that we can use our collective thought processes to be the voice of the voiceless, to liberate better humans as we help the rest of mankind to graduate from humankind to kind humans. Where I'm a businessman, even business itself sees the role being intricately intertwined with that of the society and the community from which they are located. Where, of all the things we can choose to be, imagine if we chose to be kind. Where we are deeply and profoundly connected human beings. Where we create spaces, holding spaces, especially for those that are marginalized, so that we can open these economic spaces, so that they can realize their potential. I said not their fullest potential, just their potential. Where we can also pause and just enjoy the moment rather than worrying too much about tomorrow or being haunted by our past. Where we can help solve some of the intractable problems of the country. Because unfortunately today, how these manifest, and it's true for the rest of the continent, but let me use South Africa for a second, where inequality is widening and racism is at an all-time high. Where black graduates roam the streets hopelessly, and yet we know that leaders are dealers in hope. Where public education has collapsed, public health care continue to fail the poor and the vulnerable. Where crucial infrastructure is laying barren. Where lawlessness has become an epidemic. Where education is not valued as much as it should be, because it was Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela who said, you see, education allows one to transcend social classes, makes it possible for you to be born in Alexander, 2 kilometers from the richest square mile in the continent called Sandton, with nothing. 670,000 population in a 6 square kilometer radius. After 25 years of hard work and application, it becomes possible for you to afford to buy a house in the leafy suburbs of Bryanston. Not because you want a tender, but because you have earned it, you deserve it, and you can afford it. Because we know that when one steadily burns the midnight oil, one gains access to the domain of knowledge and wisdom, the world of meaning, the world that cannot be conquered without a persistent crusade. And yet, for some strange reason, we were hoping that the people who call themselves our leaders would have increased the standards. Now they are telling us that 30% is an acceptable pass mark. Imagine for a moment going to see a clinician and you wonder, I wonder which 50% does this one know? This Africa that all of us have been praying for. the Africa of our dreams. The Africa where we have the freedom to reimagine. The Africa to describe, to define, to shape it in our own image. We are so at peace with who we are, how we present, how we will look, rather than always being obsessed with hero worshipping others and wanting to be others, to look like others, because everything that is black is associated with poverty, with backwardness, with lack of progress. And yet, everything that is white is supposed to be clever and modern and heavenly. That's why the title of my first book is called That Lift As You Rise. It's a present participle tense. It's continuous. It doesn't say lift once you have arisen. It says in the process of rising, extend a hand and lift another human being. Take 1-2 steps in the corporate ladder of success and lift another human. Don't wait until you are at the pinnacle. Because the true meaning of success is who we become in the process of succeeding, not once we have succeeded. Lift as you rise says, at a personal level, if you're an individual, there is no exercise better for the heart than extending a hand down and lifting another human being. Because that's how we find our value, meaning, and purpose. Because that's what it means to be truly human. Did I move anything here? You can still hear me well. Yeah, perfect. I still look handsome. Yeah. Lift as you rise. Says, if you are a government, the best amongst us lead with a heart of a servant, because servant leadership is not a leader with many servants. It says if you are a business, you need to continue to do well by doing good. Because when business does well, society generally does well. It says if you are a business, you can't afford to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. Because when business creates jobs, it's not in and of itself. But you are creating markets of the future, because there's a problem when your own people, your own employees, can't afford the goods and services that you provide. That business has a soul. It's not dead and static. It is there to fulfill customer needs. And it does that best in an environment where there's this unity in purpose, in the combining spirit of peace. Lift as you rise says, fables, they often reflect the truth. Therefore, nature is a wonderful metaphor for business. You see, there is nothing that nature does that it does for itself. Nature is not selfish. So in English, when you do things only for yourself, we say you are selfish. When you do things for others expecting something in return, we say you are unselfish. But when you do things for others expecting nothing in return, we say you are selfless. Nature is selfless. That's why the sun will always rise from the east and set to the west without fail. It does that whether you see it or not. Even when it's overcast, it just does it because it understands it is its own moral obligation. It's not trying to please anybody. You see, the rain will fall at the dedicated time. We're in the Highveld. We get our rains in summer. In the Western Cape, you'll think it's a different country. They get theirs in winter. It will do that year after year after year. It will fall in the deserts of the Sahara where not much life is evident. It will do so in the hills of Emondlo at Nkandla, in Langa and Nyanga in Guguletu. It will come down on the graves, but also in the sugar fields. That's why rivers don't drink their own water. Trees don't eat their own fruit. You see, the sun doesn't shine because itself needs the vitamin D. The flower gives this wonderful fragrance, not because itself wants to smell like Fontainebleau versus Calcutta in summer when it's hot and humid. It's not self, but the other-centered. When you've been in love, you might understand. Because being in love, it's not about me, myself, I. It's about you. How can I make you whole? How can I complement and augment you? How can you feel better in my presence? Because when I see you happy, it comes back to me tenfold. Lift as you rise says it's all our job to make ourselves useful and find spaces where we can be useful. The second book, the first book, Lift as you rise, is an African edit. I could have quoted William Wordsworth or Macbeth, but I was deliberate, conscious, purposeful, because I am an African, in case you haven't realized. To assert the Africanness. Because you see, it is African that has been killed. It is Africanness that has been marginalized, extinguished, wiped off. So when you go to Egypt, you see the wonderful pyramids, but you see the Sphinx. The Sphinx have broad nostrils like the one I have, to show that black people build these magnificent structures. When Europeans came, they couldn't fathom this, that Africans could build such magnificent structures that stay. And they chopped off their nostrils so that it should meet their narrative, so that they can sell us skin lightening creams, so that we aspire to be anything other than ourselves. You see, when you kill an entire nation, it's called genocide. Like we saw on the 27th of April, 1994, in the snaking queues when we're ushering in South Africa's own democracy. Not far from here, in Rwanda, 800,000 Tutsis were massacred by Hutus. At the end of that month, 1 million of them were dead. When men kill women, it's called femicide. Because there's something wrong with these men. But when you steal a people's culture, forays, mores, folkways, and the ways of doing things, it's called ethnocide. even this 85-year-old award-winning African airline called South African Airways, which is now no more. Like a legendary phoenix trying to emerge from the ashes, still struggling. You can see I'm blacker than black. So when they come to serve me, and I'll say dumela man, so we say chicken or beef, and say we are pelanko sam, and say still or sparkling. Because somehow we've been led to believe that the lingua franca of business is English. The only way you can show you are professional is only when you speak English. And the people who normally do that are the people who haven't traveled. Because in China, in Japan, in India, in Italy, and in Spain, they do business in Chinese and Japanese, in Indian, in Italian, in Spanish. But for some reason, we've been led for 370 years that for you to be professional, you have to say it in English. To an extent that we now confuse being clever with an ability to speak English or with formal education. So hence an African adage to say it's okay to be yourself. You don't have to wish to be anything else. The second book is an African adage. Not by accident, purposeful. The full African expression says, behold the turtle comma, he only makes progress when his neck is stuck out. How very apt for me in these times, when all of us as leaders need to say, we want to stick our neck out and speak truth to power. Because you see, the tortoise and the turtle has a wonderful shell, which is a shield. It's warm and comfortable in there. But as long as it's enjoying this warmth and comfort, it goes nowhere fast. For it to move from point A to point B, it needs to stick its neck out. That's how it makes progress. But when it does that, there's a real chance that a bird of prey could be hovering, plug its head, and have it for lunch. Therefore, for the turtle, moving forward in space and in time, it's a dance. It's literally a dance with death. Each time it makes progress, it risks it all. Isn't what our leaders did? Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela with Reginald Oliver Tambo were middle class. They had a law firm and they located it in the center of Johannesburg, CBD. They called it Chancellor House. They could have represented these political people that are being pursued by the apartheid government. But they said there is no progress for any of us until all of us are free. Like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, 1957, they were the very first African country to be free. They could have enjoyed their freedom and said, look at the full other African countries, they are still slaves of colonialism. But Kwame Nkrumah said, we, Ghana, will never be free until the rest of Africa is free. And they said, we'll house them here, we'll hide them here, we'll fight with them, we'll be with them in the fire as they attempt to get their own liberation from colonialism. "33,000 days later, on the 27th of April 1994, South Africa became the last but one country to attain its independence from colonialism. After the last one was South Sudan, probably 8th year this year. They risked it so that all of us became free. So behold, the title says, all of us need to stick our neck out and risk it all and speak truth to power and say, not on our watch, not in our name. Especially in South Africa, where we collect, as I conclude, an average of 1.4 trillion South African rands a year, every year, from the South African Revenue Service. Do the math. Last census, there was 60.1 million of us. You divide that by 1.4 trillion South African rand, there is no reason why any of us should be poor. And yet in apartheid, only 7% of us went to institutions of higher learning, 26 public universities. Today, we've increased that number to only 11%. So what happens to the other 89%? So behold, the title says, especially in South Africa, we stole 1.5 trillion South African rands in 5 years of state capture. In the 9 wasted years, we're siphoning off on average 200 billion just to the 2 Zupta families. Now, we experience on average 7 service delivery protests a day, every day. Against our own black government. People that went to Robben Island. And we believed that because they spent 27 years in Robben Island, they are incorrigible, therefore uncorruptible. And yet our brothers and sisters from the rest of the continent have been telling us and warning us that, hey, when they come back, you will be in trouble, just like us. That there are 3 things we have learned in the continent. One is that this Uhuru president that stay in power for more than 40 years are not good for Africans. That even the good guys left on their own for far too long eventually become the bad guys. That you need a viable opposition to keep the good guys in check. See, the pandemic has taught us many things. One of them finds expression in an African adage that says, when fisher women can't go out to sea, they repair their nets. So what are you and I going to do after 750 days of national lockdown when the Disaster Management Act was retired? To repair our nets, our key relationships, significant others. To say, as we sit down as a family over supper, what is our grandparents eating? What about my niece and nephews? Who's going to pay their registration fees at the University of Johannesburg just so that they can improve the quality of lives of themselves, because we say a better life for all. That when a child is not embraced by his village, he will burn it down in order to feel its warmth. That sons learn by looking at the back of the heads of their fathers. Therefore, it behooves us to build our own businesses and hire our own children, because it's an absolute madness to continue to make babies and then send them to a different neighborhood, for them to go down on their knees to ask somebody else for a job. You've been very generous with your time this morning. Why don't I stop there for some violent disagreements, some questions, comments, and then I can go home and say, I've tried to make myself useful. Meg Grace, does that help? Ke a leboha hle moratuwa. Should I ask them questions directly?
I think we must also acknowledge our alumni who are with us online.
I will remember them online and also ask them a question. So in fact, to see whether it's working, why don't I ask somebody on the line to ask a question? If it's difficult, I will ask some of my colleagues here to help me. Let's see how that works. Let's get one question online and see whether it works. Or they send it to the big boss, Lennox. When you're ready, you'll indicate to me?
Yeah, once I get a few, I'll let you know.
Questions, comments, colleagues? You will be first, Mene. Let me see some more hands. Let me see some more hands. Let me see some. You'll be second. You'll be third. You'll be fourth. She'll be fifth because she welcomed me here at 7:45. And she and I will be the last to leave here, so she can ask her question. Fifth, you'll be sixth. In that order. Let's start with the first. It's okay if I move around. I'm not too out of your range. It's a black thing. Blacks like moving around.
Hello, my name is Sarah. So my question would be, do you think, would you equate the concept of lift as you rise to the concept of black tax?
Yes. You start with the most difficult questions. You're supposed to ease me into it. It's called foreplay. So the way I think about it, white people invest for their children when they are born. When they turn 18, the policy matures. So when they go to University of Pretoria, they might buy them a Volkswagen Beetle, and that's why they drive around in their own cars. You and I go to the train and the bus and the taxi. Huh? And I think our parents do that because not entirely their fault. In South Africa, I mean, for 370 years of colonialism, 98 years of separate development, 48 years of apartheid, they would pay a black person 1/10 of what they pay a white person for work of equal value. Fast forward to where we are today, we haven't done anything to change the legacy spatial planning of apartheid. Black people today, on average, still live, on average, 40 kilometers away from their places of work, which consumes, on average, 40 minutes every day to go one way and 40 minutes going back, and consumes 40% of their meager monthly wages. When you add food, that's 70%. That leaves 30% for them to do other things. No wonder we have the lowest saving rate of the BRICS countries, of which we are part of that economic bloc. Because structurally, how do you expect these black people to save? There are some black people who tell you today that they work for just transport and food. And then at the end of the month, nothing is left. But they continue to do it because if they stay at home, what will they do? So if they work for transport and food, at least after 5 years, they can say, I've got 5 years experience, and hope that maybe they'll be supervisors, they'll earn slightly more, which is actually quite wise. So lift as you rise, my sister says, where I come from, our mothers would have many of us because we also died early. They would have 10 kids, maybe 7 would make it those days. In the hope that of those 7, 1 or 2 of them might get a good job and look after them. So we are their insurance policies. There's an African adage that says it takes a whole village to bring up an African child. Because all the grandmothers and the grandfathers where you come from are praying without you knowing that you pass, and you come back and read their letters from their sons who are in the mines in Carltonville. Because when you do well, they do well. Therefore, I actually don't see it as a black tax. I see it as a moral obligation. My parents sent me to school in Limpopo. They sell a cow or 3 for their girls to go to Terfloop. They come back as graduates so that they can better look after themselves. The bonus will be when they can buy some bricks and build a proper house with bricks and mortar, and then the families. Or for Christmas, they can bring a JoJo and have their own water reservoir. And over a period of time, they'll have a bedroom for girls and a bedroom for boys, and hopefully a bedroom for our parents. That's progress. It's moving forward in space and in time. So instead of seeing it as black tax, I would say now it's my turn to also invest in the economy. The whole economy of Zimbabwe, 2010, there were 12 million Zimbabweans. 5 million of them were outside of Zimbabwe, only in 2 countries, in South Africa and Botswana. 60% of the economy of Zimbabwe was held by these 5 million that were working as domestic servants, as garden boys, as professionals like Ntate Moyo, who became a partner at Ernst & Young, then looked after the Old Mutual employee benefits business, went on to become the deputy MD of Old Mutual Group when Roddy Sparks was the MD, Mthandazo Peter Moyo, who's now a South African. Like the many, just Zimbabweans. Out of the 5 big mining companies we have in this country, 4 of them were managed by black people. 3 of them were Zimbabweans. Only 1 was Zambian. They send this money back home, and it creates an ecosystem, an economy that kept Zimbabwe going. So instead of a black tax, I look at it and say, now that I'm the lucky one that has punched through, my moral obligation, I don't need my parents to tell me this. I know it. My moral obligation is to look after myself. And my lovely wife, Susan. 24th of August last year, we were happily married for 40 years. 40 glorious years. Don't be alarmed. I got married at 17. And I said, Susan, would you marry me? She said, yes. I look at her now and say, what were you smoking? At 17, what do I have? What do I know? I was nothing. I had not even... And she said, yes. And she still has not traded me in for a younger, cleverer, wealthier, more hardworking African. To look after Susan, Bonang and Susan. She's born me 2 divine daughters, Mkhono Tsepiso and Maneo. That is my job, to make sure that these 2 daughters of ours have a roof over their head and they have a future that's better than ours. And they did go to better schools than ours because we are products of apartheid, raw as it is. I went to Katlehong High School. Lepile Taunyana was my principal. That's why I met Susan, by the way, and I forced her to sit on the same desk with me every morning. She didn't look like she was protesting too much. but went on to build my own mother a house in the suburbs, because we are from Katlehong, a township not too far from here. In the suburbs, when it became legal for black people to own their houses in the suburbs, to buy there. At number 10 Taibos Road in Leondale in 1979. And went on to buy a house for my in-laws, Susan's mom and father, A.B. and Koki, Edith Chiwota, the Chiwotas, from Chegutu in Zimbabwe. A house in 240 Klepsprenger in Leondale, 3 streets away from where we lived. And it gave me a lot of joy and satisfaction. Joy is slightly more than happiness. And to send my niece and nephews to school so that they can be better educated than us and have a better quality of life than all of us. So the youngest one is Ikageng Tekiso. He's at Stellenbosch. His brother, Ikaneng Basimani, is here at the University of Pretoria. I pay for those fees. Their parents can afford to pay for them, but I insist. Because I think it's my job. It's my job. And I think I'm all the better for it. So I pull a long train of people that I'm looking after. And it makes me happy. I would never think of it as black tax, but it is. Because you know that when you earn 10,000 a month, and your white counterpart earns 10,000 a month, they spend 10,000 a month on themselves only. Your 10,000 rand, when it comes, it's your parents in the village, it's yourself, and if you are lucky enough to have chosen somebody, it's the two of you. And then your own siblings, when they go to UJ, they'll say, you know, I've applied, now I need 300 rand, just registration fee, it has to come from you. And then after being accepted, they say, you know, they're organizing their meetings on WhatsApp. And my feature phone, it's not a smartphone. Could you upgrade me? You pay for it. And they say, you know, I'm still writing my essays on a notebook. They are now using laptop, and then you buy a laptop. So your 10,000 rand gets sometimes divided by 10. True. Let me end by saying, in South Africa, each black person that we hire looks on average after a minimum of 5 other people. Minimum. So I think very carefully. I chair the board of the Bidvest Group Limited. I said when I started, we employ 138,000 people. We've got 7 divisions. We have 350 companies. 250 of them are operating entities. The group CEO is Me Tembekile Ntombienhle Madisa. In short, we say Nompumelelo Tembekile Madisa, group CEO. So when I'm thinking of retrenching her, I know that I'm probably affecting 5 other families. So I don't do it lightly, precisely because of what you have asked. But you see how I think about it myself. It's a thought, right? You know why a thought? Because that's how we define leadership. Leadership is defined as anybody that feels called upon to lead is a leader. It's a feeling. Feels called upon to lead is a leader. So in life, all of us go about trying to frame the expectations. Just to frame them. Because if you expect nothing, the chances are you'll never be disappointed. Because disappointment is defined as when reality does not meet the expectation. So you can't affect reality, but you can manage the expectation. So when we as black people amongst ourselves change our diction, and we don't call it a black tax, but lifting as we rise, we sleep better at night. Who was number 2?
Very interesting. So,
are you number 2?
Number 2. That's what I'm trying to explain.
Yes.
Yeah, why I just want to add the context to.
Mike.
Yeah, just to put a context to the question she asked. Sir, black tax has really changed over the years. Before it used to be maybe you paying somebody's school fees or trying to send money to your parents. But over the years, people have devised a means to use, let me not use the word black tax, but to use this, our community driven, like our community mindset, to take money from us. There are some people actually that will just say, okay, my brother is at so place, he's a big brother and all of that. I want to have a very nice weekend, maybe if I send a message to my brother, he may send me money. That is, I think, that is part of the problem, and that is the reason why some people, want to give it a second thought before they support people. Then, secondly, the issue of lifting people or lifting our communities in Africa, I think it should have some nuances to it. When we make it very simplistic by saying that, okay, once you rise, try to raise another person, it's a bit simple at that level. But again, we have very wealthy people in Africa. Do we really have a capital venture? Do we really have a very strong capital venture for the African continent like we have in the US? For example, if you have a business here, is your investment, your major investment, is it likely to come from Africa or from the United States or other places? I think we need to discuss these issues too, because I know there are billionaires in Africa that are not really investing in African businesses. So aside lifting the next person close to you, we should also be thinking of how we can really build, big capital to support, the young generation. Then the black tax that Sarah mentioned, like I said, it has really changed. People now devise means to just take money from other people.
You're absolutely correct. And I like how you've added to it. That's why it's called a dialogue. But has it really changed? Or the fundamental principle is the same? I'll give you 2 examples. That's why I took a bit of time in answering Sarah. Because remember, we use these questions to have a greater conversation so that when we leave here to say, oh, it was worth the investment of my time. The first example I want to give you, I'll be simple, not simplistic. So you're driving your Toyota Prado VX to the Namib Desert. And you screech to a halt because the sand has gotten into your wheels. Alone, you get out of your Prado and you push it. And you realize that you don't have the physical strength to get it out. You get into a cloud of frustration and say, what now? On your rear view mirror, you see another African just like you, coming at great speed, and you know what's going to happen to him. Screeches to a halt next to you. He does exactly the same thing. You see him get out, try his luck to push this thing. It goes nowhere fast. He gets into his car and gets stuck. Lifting as you rise, the way I understand it is, you the one that gets out of your car. You go to this guy, you knock on his window and say, I can see what has happened to you because it has happened to me. Why don't I help you to push your car? The 2 of you push his car out. There's 2 of you now. You push it out. He jumps into his car, starts, ready to go. Says, not so fast. Now it's your turn to come and help me to push mine. And he pushes you out, and then the 2 cars are out. What's the lesson for me? On my own, I couldn't push my Prado. On his own, he couldn't push his probably Toyota VXK or VXR now. But the two of us accomplished that which was on my own was going to take me inordinately long or would have been impossible. But by combining our strengths, we managed it. That's lifting as you rise. But remember, this concept is not new. Those of you who come from home in rural areas, we knew you had a piece of land. When you needed to till this land, the whole village came and helped you till this land and plant, with the full expectation that tomorrow we come and help her. And then on Wednesday, we help her. And that way, we were food secure. In Africa, when you saw that one family was struggling, we never used to laugh at that family. The elders in the village would look and say, I'll give him a cow, and then a cow, somebody will donate a bull. In 5 years, this person has 7. The expectation was when there's another family that's poor, this one that now has 10 cattle is the first one to go and say, let me see if I can help. That's why in Africa there is no such thing as an orphan. Because up until today, when I go to my village, my mother, before we sleep, before we sit down for supper, will prepare one plate of a full meal and say, take this one to Nkgono Madikgetsi, and I'll run quickly because I think they'll finish the meal to Mema Madikgetsi. When I give her this full plate, she gives me the dishes from yesterday. And I come running back because the preoccupation was, but if we eating, what's happening to Mema Madikgetsi? Because the village knows she's unable to. It was our job. Accelerate to what you're talking about today. Aliko Dangote is not too poor. He's building the first refinery in Africa. In South Africa alone, we consume 30 billion liters of liquid fuels. 20 billion we refine ourselves from the 4 refineries. 10 we import. We sell 7.2 liters a day every day. Oliko looks at this and say, there's 1.3 billion of us. In Gauteng alone, it's a 12 million car park. There's money to be made here. Patrice Motsepe here in South Africa, not very poor. In fact, that whole family, not very poor. Amongst other investments, is African Rainbow Minerals, was the first black billionaire in this country. The sister, Mema Motsepe, ran Alexco Mining through Makau Mining, so not very poor, the two Motsepes. The current president, Madame Cyril Ramaphosa, gets married to the sister who's a clinician. Jeff Radebe marries this other one, who's the de facto prime minister those days. The question is, when you have a brilliant idea in South Africa today, will Patrice Motsepe invest in your brilliant idea with this understanding that I worked hard, but I got lucky, got in mining at the time that it wasn't fashionable, made money, can now use my money wisely, like we did in helping to plant so that all of us are sufficient. Does it have that chutzpah to be able to think that way? No. Can he do what Jewish people do? Jewish people today don't run to the bank the first time, not because they don't like banks, because they know they've made enough money. So when one starts a business today in the Jewish community, says, I need 10 million, they don't wait to say, could you 2 million? No. They say, oh, you need 2 million. Somebody says, here's 2, the other one says 1, here's 5, and then you have 10. But they don't stop there. The next morning they wake up and they go and support you to make sure that you're successful. They set you up for success. Different. Look at how far they've graduated. But when you look at the history here in South Africa, the guy that started the Bidvest Group Limited, which I chair today, is Brian Joffe. He tells the story that was in Shul in Parktown. He sat next to Stephen Kosef. As they left, he says to Stephen Kosef, I've got this brilliant idea. There's a business I want to buy. He says, Stephen Kosef said to him, Brian Joffe, come and see me on Tuesday. He goes to see him at Investec, which he owns. Says, how much money do you need? He says, no, 7 million. He gives him the 7 million. He didn't say, where's your ID? Sasana, I owe you. Where's your cows? Can I touch them? No, he says, yes, 7 million. He went further, he says, because it looks like you like buying businesses, go and find businesses. We know the good ones and the not so good ones. Bring them to us. We have an entire department that does due diligence. We'll tell you the dogs and the stars. And once you find the stars, we commit to finance all the stars so that you don't go around looking for money. Imagine if you had that. Would you really fail? Brian Joffe went on to build this empire that employed 350,000 people. 10 years ago, we decided to break it into half. The food business called Bees Food, mostly overseas, we listed it separately, called Bidcorp. We remained with Bidvest South Africa. Mpumi became the CEO. Mpumi has now bought 3 companies just in the last 2 years. Bought UK's biggest hygiene business called PHC for £495 million in the UK. Went on to buy another one called Noonan in facilities management, both in London and in Ireland. Just bought a company now called PIC in Australia. So Mpumi is now building this group. So the 135,000 I was talking about is just this thing that was South Africa. I exclude Bidfoods. Look what he has built. Because he had a sure-proof guarantor in a bank that said, you find them, I'll finance. Many black people have brilliant ideas, zero access to capital. Because other blacks don't believe in them. That's why I like your addition to Sarah's question to say, let's not think about it in Letsima, we call it in Sesotho, but in modern day South Africa where we can coordinate and aggregate our own wealth to create more businesses. That's why I looked at her and said we need to build our own businesses and hire our own children. With that Lift as You Rise, it becomes possible. It don't take us 100 years. It might take us 2 years if we do that. Sarah, has your lawyer spoken for you? You happier? Let's do 2. Mine says 11:15.
Where is 2?
Tell us if you want us to. I'm still on number
2.
Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Kadambi. So my initial question was on black tax, but you have answered it quite well. So I'll go to leadership and specifically governance in Africa. My question is Africa in a phase where we can't have good leaders, as it happened in other countries, that now we are in a phase that will outgrow, or is it somewhere that we have a big problem that we can't get out of? And specifically, as you're talking about businesses and growing the economy in that way, you find that in most African countries, investors find it so hard to venture in different industries because they ask for these bribes and someone wants this and someone wants this. And even at some point, you find that companies decide not to build in a certain country and go to another one because someone somewhere is sitting and deciding if you don't give me this, you don't get to venture in this. So what do you think about that and how do we get out of it?
Wow. Good governance. So let's start with definitions because you are students. So good cooperative governance is how you separate ownership from control. governance itself says a number of pieces. One is this notion called fiduciary responsibility. So it's defined in King 4. It's defined in the Companies Act. But let me give you the definition that comes from PFMA as an acronym for the Public Finance Management Act. That definition says, to act in the best interest of the entity, and not in the best interest of the shareholders, not the best interest of employees. That's good governance. But in simple English, good governance simply says, do we have the duty of care, skill, and diligence? Most importantly, the duty of faith, so that society continue to believe in these entities. That's the one that's less sexy we talk about. You see, the good Lord can't be so unfair as to create black people and put them in the southernmost tip of the continent and leave them without any form of faith or worship. It's not possible. So we had our own ways of doing things. Our elders would sit under the marula tree the whole day, drinking African beer to solve the problems of the village. So in the olden days, when they saw a small boy who's naughty, who's jumped the fence, we didn't have fences at that time, to steal apricots from the neighbor's tree, they had many options. They could bring this boy in public and whip his ass. But they didn't. They would take this boy and put him under the tree and look him in the eye and say, are you thirsty? He's shaking knowing that he's in trouble. And say, yes. They'll go to the well and give him the most coldest of water. So, are you hungry? The appetite is going to say, no, I'm okay. And they'll give him a little bit of biltong, because remember, biltong is an African thing. We didn't have fridges, so that's how we preserved our meat. And then they'll go on to tell this boy about what his uncle did in planting this willow tree next to the well, in the full knowledge that he himself was not going to enjoy the tree of that willow tree. They'll tell about his father, who used to sit as part of this council of elders, and his contribution is to society. And each one of these men will be exalting and speaking and reminding this young man about the great deeds of his forebears. By the time they're finished with him, the boy stands up, can't believe that he wasn't beaten, with one mind and one mind only, to say, I didn't know that my forebears were such great, wonderful, amazing people. Now I am proud to be called a Mohale. My job is to hold this name of the Mohales in great honor and never to disown it. That's how they dealt with it. The old ladies in the village, they will look after the other younger ladies that have just been married when their men are off to the mines. When they see that trouble has happened for some reason, they would write a letter to the husband in the mines and say, you better come home. Your wife is seriously ill, and we don't think she's going to make it. The guy looks at the letter, shows to his supervisor, gets onto the bus. In the village, they could see it coming because of the dust from a distance. He gets home and he finds the wife and the old lady is going to him and says, she's actually better today. It was bad. The guy stays Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Monday. He goes back knowing that the wife has left to the mines. 7 months later, they send a letter to say, you have been blessed with a son. The poor guy looks at the mines and he counts. That must be the time I was at home. That was 7 months ago. That's why in Africa there is no such thing as an orphan. They've solved the problem. Because the old lady saw when a husband goes to the mines for 11 months, sometimes stuff happens. But they would manage it. That was justice. Today, our laws in South Africa is called Roman Dutch English law. What happened to the laws of Sekhukhune, of Moshoeshoe? of Dingani, of Senzangakhona, of Ngungunyani. Because again, foreign converses pour from our lips, foreign ropes hang from our necks. We want to be anything else other than ourselves. Let me end by saying, you know, when the Dutch people have money and they look at Maslow's hierarchy of need and they want to self-actualize, they build houses in the Cape, and those houses are called Cape Dutch homes in South Africa. When the Italians have money in Dainfern, in Johannesburg, they build Tuscany. That reminds them of home. They put murals and art that reminds them of home so that they don't feel lost in South Africa. When a black man has money, he stops eating brown bread. Even though it's healthy, because it reminds him of poverty. He comes from a mud house with a thatch roof. He hates thatch with all his life. It reminds him of his village in Limpopo. He brags at Konka and Tasha's to say, my house is Tuscany. I use Cambridge art, not art from Alexander. That's why we are poor and miserable. Who's number 3? Number 3.
Is it ready? All right, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation.
He looks like Malcolm X, isn't it? When you meet him in New York City, you say, hi, Africa, I suppose. You don't ask. You can see he's an African.
Yes. Okay, Prof. What I want to speak about is more like the foundation of all the problems we have right now, and most of the questions that have been raised about why black African rich men, the rest, don't invest in the black community. So first off, let me start by saying a little rhyme. There's this rhyme some of us can relate to that says, when we were young in nursery school, they say, pussycat, pussycat, where have you been? I've been to London to see the Queen. So a child grows up in a village in Africa. The first thing he learns about is how to go to London to see the Queen, not how to go to the village square to see his own king and queen. Okay, so there is another aspect to this. It was the Soviet Bolshevik leader, Vladimir Lenin, that says, give me a child for the first 8 years and I'll give you a communist.
Yes.
So what we teach children in the developmental formative years of their life goes on to build them into the kind of adults they become. If we look around Africa today, I'm sorry to say this, the kind of education we have in Africa is not going to solve Africa's problem currently. Why? Firstly, the education we receive in the universities today is not teaching Africans how to be Africans and how to invest in their community. But most people go to school to separate themselves from their communities.
Sure.
So this is the reason why when you see people, sometimes they cross the border into other countries, the first thing they do is they learn to acquire accents so that when they get to their communities and villages, they can use it to oppress their people and show their people that they are different from them, that they have been out there, that they have gone to the university and all that. So this problem dovetails into every sector, including the business sector, where the rich African businessman wants to partner more with the Italian businessman, the American businessman, the British businessman, and the rest, and not a fellow African. So collaboration also in the university today, everybody wants to, co-publish with somebody in the British university and the rest. So it dovetails, it permeates every sector of the society, and this is a fundamental problem. Every day, you mentioned that how, you see, when children grow up, first of all, the first thing they learn is how to model themselves into a pale version of the European. There is a fundamental problem with the psyche of such an individual. that individual will never invest in their community. Why? Because all they know is that, or all they have been told, brainwashed to believe is that my community is primitive, but the continent that carried out the most dastard, horrendous massacre, murders, the Europeans are praised, they exalt their history. You know, most Africans today, let me even say, including myself, when I grew up, everything I learned about Africa, I have to study it outside the classroom. While growing up in high school, I knew more about European history than my own history. Where did I learn about European history? It's from the classroom. Our teachers are not also helping matters. You know, we learn every single day how to perfect speaking English language, but many of us here are not fluent in our native languages. Why? The education system. And until this fundamental problem that eats into the psyche of the African is solved, we cannot make real progress, because the Chinese grows up learning how to be innovative, not how to perfect an African or European language. The British child grows up learning how to perfect innovation, solve existential problem of the British society, not how to perfect other things. I'm not very even happy about my name. My name is Patrick Ben. How does one know where I'm from? And I hate these names. I can't wait to finish my PhD and change it. What is Patrick Ben? It doesn't represent me as a person. Why should I belong to a village in Nigeria but my names are British? I've never met a British man who bears a name from my culture or my village or my place.
Mr. Ben, thank you so much. I think it captures it very well.
He really spoke like Mark on X, ne?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yes. I think it was Gorbachev who reminds us that we knew that the party was over when all we could do is to talk about our history. So Mr. Ben is absolutely spot on. Today we hold world records for all the wrong reasons. Nigeria has the highest per capita consumption of champagne, not Methode Cap Classic. Highest consumption. The brothers make so much money there, they order pizza from London. Pizza. That you wait at the window, they make, and you eat it hot. They order so that it flies 10.5 hours. Just to show that they've arrived. Let me just end by rounding it off, because I couldn't agree with you more. Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, in having a conversation with us, says, it's not the military might of the South African Defence Force that we fear. What we fear the most is what is in the psyche of the white male Afrikaner, when he believes that he is superior to us, that apartheid is God created, and therefore is their God-given right to oppress Africans. So what we have to do and fight more viciously than the might of the South African Defence Force is how we have a conversation with a white male Afrikaner that says we are human too, not subhuman. We want to treat General Constant Viljoen as a human being, to help us to liberate the African. Because when the African is liberated, he will be liberated too. But we want to do it in such a manner that at his weakest moment, he doesn't discount us as an option. Can we, in 2022, imagine a free Africa in 2030 that is self-sufficient? that can plant its own food, because 60% of all the arable land in the world is found in Africa. An Africa that generates its own ideas and moves itself forward in space and in time to take its rightful place in the community of nations. Can we imagine an Africa that is at peace with itself, not with others, that loves itself, loves her people, not steals from her people? Oppression becomes successful when you put it in the minds of people and you go away and they continue to oppress themselves. You have done a good job. So the people who continue with this oppression is us, in the absence of the masters. Let me make an analogy. When you start a business, because I said we must build our own businesses. When you start, it's about me, myself, I. You do everything yourself. If it is to be, it's up to me. It can't survive without me. When you graduate, you learn to let go. And it's about getting things done through others. But the real growth is when you say this business can do without me. Can we make babies that on their own look at themselves in a mirror absolutely naked with absolute pride that this is the manifestation of God himself? Because there is no greater beauty than this that I'm looking at. Number 5, 6, and 7, as we have breakfast, we can continue after, because I really just want to thank you for starting the conversation. When you invite me again, I can only, in an African way, say yes. Hamusutar e, orekia dumela. Oh, yes. Yeah. The big boss has spoken. Meg Grace says we forgot to take one from the alumni so that they feel included, needed, and wanted. Black and African. One more. Lennox, you delegated upwards.
Yeah, the question says, what effort have been made individually and collectively by the leadership to understand what black employers experience at work, or what black employees experience at work? Some employees say that the black people are lazy. What is your opinion on that?
This is an important question, but in the interest of time, let me just give you some sound bites. So first, there is no such thing as a lazy people. Lazy people are dinosaurs and they're dead. If you are alive today, it's because you are okay, you are thriving, you're working hard. That's hard work. But to say an entire nation is lazy, it's what we call racism. Because think about it. What is racism? Racism needs three things for it to exist. Number one, it's an inherent belief that you are superior. Number two, you have the power. Number three, you use that power to exclude. So ask yourself, no, let me ask you, what is it that black people as a group have excluded white people as a group from doing? Did you get that? The answer will be nothing. You know, right? But if you ask it the other way, you know many. In South Africa, we had 107 pieces of legislation that excluded people just because they're black. That's the definition of racism. But South Africa is very rich because we're one of very few African countries that became free without firing a single bullet. 2, that enlisted the help of other nationalities to come and help us in our own liberation. So when you look at the people that were arrested in the Rivonia trial, not all of them were black and African. Some of them were Jewish. Who paid the supreme sacrifice for the liberation of a black man in the universal sense? So we're lucky that way. That even today there are still white men and women who says, but this can be right. Let me close just with 2 things. So the first is the 27th of June, 1955 in Kliptown. It's called the Freedom Charter. It has 10 principles. The preamble to the Freedom Charter says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. So these are the people for 350 years then were under colonialism. The expectation was that when they become free, they'll send all white people to the sea. But they didn't. They codified in law in the Freedom Charter to say, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. Isn't it amazing? Huh? The 5th of the 10 principles says, and the land shall belong to those who work it. Not who inherited it by birth. Who work it. So you work the land, it must belong to you. Is that a sign of being lazy? It can be. It can be. The last one is our modern day constitution. We say it's the best in the world. Not because we are clever. No, because we stole unashamedly. So we learned from the Canadian experience how they empower women. At that time, they had 27% of their parliament being members of parliament. Today, more than 47% of Rwanda's MPs were women. We stole from the Bumiputra experience in Malaysia when the indigenous Malay people were excluded from the economic mainstream that were dominated by the Chinese people. And our constitution is the best in the world, not because of what's contained in the main body of the constitution, chapter 194, that talks about the executive duties of the elected officials. No. Section 25 of the Constitution that talks about land reform. Article 3A, 8th line from the bottom, that talks about land expropriation without compensation. That line says, when conditions of fair and equitable have been adequately fulfilled, then compensation can be down to 0. Not because of that. Our constitution is the best in the world because of the one page, that is called the preamble to our constitution. That's why it's the best in the world, just that one page. And it starts by saying, we the people. That's the first line, we the people. Recognizing our past injustices. Goes to the middle, and in the middle, it pronounces the 3 pillars on which the whole of this constitution is based. It talks about social justice. The last one, it talks about fundamental human rights. Not just human rights, but that are absolutely fundamental. The middle part promises us the freedom of association and freedom of speech. Today you can say to the president, you are a thief, and go home and sleep at night knowing you're going to wake up in your bed. The less sexy is the one that talks about freedom from hunger. See, we don't talk about that freedom from hunger. And yet many of our people are still hungry today. Then it goes on to both implore and mandate you and I to correct these past injustices. You see, it started by saying, we the people. Then it says, you and I must correct this past injustice. It ends with a hymn. Hymn called the Healing Song, 1849 by Enoch Sontonga, called Nkosi Sikelel' Africa. God bless Africa, bless his people, bless its leaders. And our forebears do something that is absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. After 370 years of colonialism, 98 years of separate development, 48 years of apartheid, they take the worst of apartheid and they give us one national anthem. One national anthem. One is from the Healing Song, Nkosi Sikelel', which has become and was a national anthem of 4 other African countries before we were free, written by this South African Enoch Sontonga. And that becomes the first and the second stanza. Nkosi Sikelel' Africa, Morena Boloka, South Africa. Then they take the worst of apartheid, the stem, and they include it. Et die bloof aan onze hemel. And then they take the last stanza from the stem and they write it in English so that it's inclusive. We call it D&I, diversity and inclusion, right? And they write it in English. The last line of this English version, it says, we shall live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land. Knowing that at the very best, land is aspirational. Because 90% of the population, which is black, has been squashed into 13% of the land. But it says so. That to me is where the magic is contained as to why our constitution is the best in the world. Just read that one page called the preamble to our constitution. Ke a leboha hle Basotho ba haeso. Nna lebitso la ka ke Bonang Mohale.
Okay, all right. Can you hear me now? Okay. This was one of the most inspiring and, as I said, aha moment type of conversation or dialogue. And knowledge is a public good. It has to be shared. Because when we do that, we all benefit. Our communities, our countries, the continent benefits. And our continent will attain its rightful place in the world. As he said, lift as you rise, and behold the turtle. The closing remarks will be done by our scholar rep, Ntate Wish Mudondo. Thank you. And earlier I mentioned that Dr. Khadi will be joining us. She's here with us. We report to Dr. Khadi as our office resides in the Department for Education Innovation. She's my boss. Okay, Wish.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Grace. First of all, allow me to thank the MasterCard Foundation Scholarship Management for arranging this day for us. Scholars, can you help me in giving them a round of applause? And secondly, I would also like to thank you, scholars, for coming here today. I mean, for your participation as well, because Professor could have spoken, but it's also your response in the conversations that made this whole event profound. So give yourself another round of applause. So I'm actually a fan of Professor Mohale. I actually watch some of the videos, interviews that he has on YouTube. But what caught my attention is, you know, when I realized that I was supposed to give some remarks, I chose this video, that the interview that you had in 2020, right? You know, you had this interview with Books on Point when you were elaborating on your novel, Lift As You Rise, right? And during that conversation, you gave one of the most profound metaphor that can explain what a leader should be. And again, today you did the same. And you said a leader should be someone who is like nature, right? And you said nature does everything, not for itself, but for somebody else. You explained about how the river doesn't drink its own water, how the sun doesn't use its own light, and how the tree doesn't eat its own fruits, right? And at the same time, you said the best among us, you know, must lead with the heart of a servant, right? And again, you said, I mean, I like this phrase, you know, you said, each one, teach one, you know. So, I mean, to all the scholars, I mean, it's something that caught me, that, you know, that moved me when I watched the video, that even moved me today as if I was hearing for the first time, right? And I would like to say, personally, I think you being here today, giving us this session, enriching our minds, is the greatest example of that same type of a leader you explained 2 years ago. So, without me spoiling whatever you said, everything you said to the scholars, allow me to invite Jennifer, who is going to present to you our small token of appreciation. It might be small, but from the scholars, it is really, really from deep within, because you gave us one gift that can never be taken away, the gift of knowledge. Thank you very much. All right, thank you very much, Jennifer. I'll return the mic to Lennox.
All right, thank you guys. It's time for us to share the refreshments that were prepared for us. And also, please thank Lennox. I don't know what that is called, but all those pictures that have been going through the reel, it's Lennox. Thank you. Okay. We have come to the end of our day today, and as I said, there are the refreshments at the back. We can enjoy and go back. Some of us are going back to work. Bye-bye.